I am Ari Melber, and we have a lot for you tonight. We begin with the top story. President Trump has reached a record before the 100 days, and it is a record of complete measurable failure. Many of his own advisors and Wall Street allies view it as humiliating. It is something that will not only affect so many people in our country and around the world, but even if you look at it by narrow terms of just the president's record in history, this is now the blemish on his record, not only for the second term, but forever. The record is the self-inflicted choice to wipe out this much value in the stock market over just 2 days. We've been reporting how people are holding onto their hats during this tariff-inflicted meltdown over the last day. Well, tonight, as we end the week and have a whole nother day of markets, the U.S. stock market has now lost $6.4 trillion in just 2 days. This is Trump's trade war. We are losing because of Trump, because of the choices he's made. The market's tanking. Recession fears deepening. And of course, it's the economy stupid. This is not something the Republican Party will be able to lie out of, or to pardon their way out of, or to trick people into thinking that all of the problems they have, from rising prices to job fears to rising costs, that they're not real or they're somebody else's fault. We're also seeing the fear of an anti-Trump, anti-MAGA political backlash as people start to see this candidate who promised to focus on your concerns in the economy has actually, according to many, sold out the American worker.
Markets look set to sell off as Donald Trump imposes the steepest U.S. import levies in a century.
Stocks set to wipe out nearly $2 trillion in market value.
Taking a plunge as investors react to the sweeping tariffs.
Right now, angry heads are prevailing, and right now circumstances are prevailing that send stock prices much lower than where they are right now.
I struggle for what the president's game plan is. Because if you wanted to make the market crash, I think you would go with this game plan.
I haven't seen it yet. I guess it's close to panic.
This is the biggest policy mistake in 95 years.
95 years, and we can show you the top 500 companies. These are the largest companies that trade, and whether you trade in the stock market or not, as I've told you, this will affect you because these type of losses come with consequences and eventually job cuts, and of course the price and inflation issues. This is down another 6% today. Another market index you heard of, the Dow, shed over 5%. The NASDAQ, another big bucket of stocks, losing just about 6%. This is what they call an official bear market, where you are down a fifth from the peak. Trillions gone. The Fed now warning Trump's tariffs will juice inflation. Remember, that was the big issue, the high prices that helped him over the understandable concern with inflation and the way people blamed then President Biden. Well, Donald Trump's serving up more inflation. That's according to the Fed, which is the independent arm of monetary policy for the federal government, and of course, the risk of recession or slower growth. One of the top banks, J.P. Morgan, says we have tipped over to a recession now being more likely than not, 60%. That is, based on all the modules they have, it is more likely than not that Trump's choice to do these tariffs will give us a recession that otherwise was less likely. Indeed, before Trump came into office, though, same banks were putting the recession fears much lower, like 20%. The Financial Times, which is sort of the British version of the Wall Street Journal as a Bible for the market, says this is an astonishing act of self-harm by Donald Trump. Then their counterpart that I mentioned in the U.S., Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, quote, someone should sue to block his abuse of power. The Journal, now suddenly concerned about Trump lawlessness, something they have often minimized on other topics. China is hitting back, and boy, do they have the resources and the runway to do it. They're matching the whopping 30% tariff. Economics can be complicated, but this part is simple. I will tell you, America, if I can speak directly with you, you will be paying that tariff. That's exactly how it works, which is exactly why so many people, apart from our divided political times and partisan lenses, so many people, from nonpartisan experts to liberals who warned against this, to Republicans who privately warned against this, although they didn't use any power to try to stop Trump, to Wall Street experts, to, of course, economists explain, yeah, a third, 34% spike and you're going to pay it, because that's what Donald Trump decided for you. Welcome to Donald Trump's America and his economics. Now, on the politics side, Republicans, late, quietly, with a shuffle step, are starting to see how this could doom their party for even more than one election. Tariffs are upsetting the entire world economy. There's political peril for the party that brought them, and take one of the Republicans who for years has backed Donald Trump ever since they made a power pact when Trump became president the first time, but now a new tune from Ted Cruz.
If the result is our trading partners jack up their tariffs and we have high tariffs everywhere, I think that is a bad outcome for America. Tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers. So my hope is these tariffs are short-lived.
Hope all you want. We are in deep. We've lost trillions. Even if Donald Trump can see the failure, can hear the markets and the television coverage and the press coverage savagely noting the savage pain that he's brought to the United States, to consumers, to workers, as well as the rest of the world, that doesn't mean he has known to adjust after going this big and this deep. Other conservatives now admitting the problem.
I'm not going to bubble wrap it. What's happening is not good.
The same people that voted for you to play by the rules, put away money for taxes, put money away for retirement, are really feeling the brunt of collateral damage of this.
Look, I hate tariffs. I think they're stupid. I think they're backwards. I don't think that they help the American economy. The president has a different opinion.
I'm certainly concerned about what's happening right now in the markets, and I hope the administration is looking at that as well.
It's hard to find a Republican who's willing to do an interview and wants to defend this stuff, which tells you the free fall. Remember, there's been a lot of talk about the trade war and a lot of bluster and some stops and starts, which we covered, but this is now the red-hot core of it. These are these first 2 days when it hit this level with these global tariffs and the pain. And in these 2 days, Republicans starting to admit they have a Trump problem. Many of the people you just saw on your screen, they cater to a base that likes Donald Trump and identifies as MAGA, but there are even limits there because they can see that they could lose their jobs, their perch, their audience, in the case of some of those commentators, because people are paying this pain. When I show you bear market 20% crash territory, after that will come the firings and the job losses. Now, most of the elected Republicans, though, are not yet even trying to use the power they actually have. They can do interviews, but they actually have power in Congress. There's been this push for a Senate bill that would better control and limit Donald Trump's tariff instincts. Most Republicans haven't supported that. A handful did. Meanwhile, business owners are feeling it.
Experts predict prices across the board, including appliances, clothing, groceries, and cars, are expected to go up.
I'm a little afraid that the price will be going up, which means a higher car payment with me, and I have 2 little kids, so that's going to be a little hard for me, too.
As a small business, we can't absorb that kind of increase in product. So we're having to reprice.
In one word, how you're feeling about what's happening in the stock market right now?
Anxious? Yeah. I mean, it's not too clear what's going to happen.
Terrified.
Why terrified?
Vulnerable people were always unsafe, and now they're made even more vulnerable.
And that's just a couple days in. There's also resistance. Protesters against the Trump-Musk agenda, as well as this economic pain, say that they have, and you can see the bullets here from this group, Hands Off, they have now confirmed protests, often more than one, in every state in the country this weekend. So the chaos is real. The pain is real. And Donald Trump basically walked off the job. Think about this level of economic calamity. When COVID hit and you had the crash, it was everyone's focus. If you go back to another crash that was not caused by U.S. policy or a president saying he didn't care, but rather the sort of complex real estate bubble that burst in 2008, well, everybody was on the job, and Bush was convening meetings with the leaders of the economy, the banks that were so at fault for some of it, and the congressional leadership to figure out every single thing that could be on the table that they could act with all deliberate emergency speed. This is a president who claims emergency powers and wartime powers when there isn't a war, and then walks off the job right now today when we're in this emergency shedding $6 trillion. He went to Mar-a-Lago. He's scheduled to do a weekend golf tour. So he left work early for that, left the White House, wasn't physically on site to deal with any of the type of meetings I mentioned that Bush did, or talk to people in Congress, or anything to even try to quiet the markets and show leadership. He's driving around his golf cart and also making money because it's his private business that's hosting the Saudi event. Markets may burn, but he's counting up his own money. Just as I told you, he took a lot of crypto money and thought, oh, as long as he's doing okay, forget everyone else. If he lost $6 trillion, which he doesn't have, I think we would hear a very different tune, and he might even have time to go to work instead of ride around the cart. Now, how is this playing out in MAGA land? I showed you the leadership. We heard from Republicans who are running away, but you got to understand, one of the great political strengths of Donald Trump is the overestimation of his support. I'm sure you watch the news if you're hearing me, and there's been many, many reports and examples of folks who stand by him no matter what, or reverse themselves for him, or come back to him even after doubts. But then you also have to remember, he got fewer votes in 16. He got fewer votes in 20. He blew the midterms in 18. He remains one of the most polarizing and unpopular figures, and then even the base that he does have doesn't stand by him for everything, and certainly not something like this. We began by showing you some of those Republicans who are worried about how many of their supporters, even in red districts, are upset at this self-inflicted economic calamity. I'm going to show you one example of a kind of a sort of podcast digital leader. We heard all about those podcasts, who is a huge Trumpy, Dave Portnoy. He has millions of followers. But with all respect for real to how this new generation talks online, a lot of them don't just say what they're supposed to say or do partisanship. So everyone knows he's MAGA, but he was quite candid about how he felt, and he's quite successful about how much money he's losing and how he opposes and can't even make sense of what Donald Trump is doing to his pocketbook and to many of his listeners' pocketbooks who have a lot less money than him. Take a look.
And it's Tariff City. Trump has put his tariffs all over the place. I've been trying to understand them. I don't. And everything's in the because of it. How much you down right now and today? 7 million. I'm down $7 million in stocks and crypto.
That's what it sounds like when your leader lies, ignores all advice, starts an economic global calamity, and costs you a ton of money. Now, we have a special guest you might recognize from the Obama era, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein, when we're back in 90 seconds.
Switching. Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs across the entire globe. Asia, South America, Narnia, Arendelle, Wakanda, Bachelor Nation.
Worst day for our economy since COVID. Just a little reminder, this time, he's the disease.
Tariffs went all the way from 54% to 10%, and today so did his approval rating.
Just some of the ways this story has been boiled down, but sometimes you also might need an economist to get into the details, and we have one. President Obama chose Jared Bernstein as his chief White House economist. He also served as chair of the powerful Council of Economic Advisors in the most recent Biden administration. Welcome, Jared.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great to have you. There are doctors who do preventive medicine, and then there are doctors, of course, who deal with illness. And when they're in demand, it's a bad thing. It's in that realm that we come to you tonight. You're in demand as an expert to deal with this terrible thing. And yet it's something you've studied and understand, especially the intersection between presidents who have certain goals and the actual economic realities. How would you rate the last several days of this trade war for the U.S. worker and consumer?
Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, about minus 1 million. You know, you mentioned something about having some grasp of reality here. I think what the president and his team have done have built a completely alternative reality. And, you know, sometimes that works for them because the propaganda machine is very strong. But when you have a market situation where the losses of the past 2 days have been worse than 99.9% of all other trading, when you have the Wall Street Journal and MSNBC on the same page, when you have Republicans, when you have investors, when you have consumers, when you have businesses all telling you you're wrong, maybe you should listen to them, and we're just not getting that.
We put together what Trump wanted and said would happen to the results. Let's take a look.
With today's action, we are finally going to be able to make America great again. This will be indeed the golden age of America.
Big market sell-off this hour. It is ugly out there. The S&P 500 down 3.7%.
If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America.
Burning down the house to cook a steak. That's the line.
For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike. In many cases, the friend is worse than the foe.
We've seen the anger in the responses from many of those allies, just the shock, the worst-case scenarios that were being contemplated.
$6 trillion wiped out here in these 2 days and could get worse. For folks who don't invest in the markets or don't even have much of their own personal retirement savings or are counting on Social Security, which is many people, as you well know, how do these crashes affect them?
Well, the stock market's not the economy, but it's also can be quite influential on the economy. If investors are looking at this kind of a market, they're going to be sitting on their hands, and that means less economic activity. Now, one of the things I think you referenced earlier in your intro was both slower growth and higher prices as a result of these tariffs. Now, that's called stagnation. For decades. Typically, when you have slower growth, you have less inflation. But because of the tariffs, slower growth, higher prices. Now, whether you're in the stock market or not, you've been dealing with prices that have made you unhappy for a long time. And again, as you played in your intro, we know that we're going to see higher prices on so many consumers' goods, appliances, groceries, cars, so on. So this hurts everyone, which again is why it is so vastly unpopular. Every sector, consumers, producers, businesses, and so on. And importantly, the clip you just played, you basically have Donald Trump out there, and I think this is practically a quote from him today, saying everything's fine. Don't believe your lying eyes, believe me. Well, at this point, even he can't pull that off.
Right. What do we look towards in the coming days if he doesn't quickly unwind this, and he's not indicated he would? Does this at some point hit a kind of bottom and then we have a global economy that runs like this short term? Or what do you see as an economist who does some level of forecasting?
Well, first of all, yes, I like to forecast, but I don't try to forecast the stock market. That's pretty, that's not something you can do. But here's the thing. Every time Donald Trump raises a tariff, the stock market goes down. If he raises a tariff a little, it goes down a little. If he raises a tariff a lot, like he did on Liberation Day yielded Liquidation Day. We had one Liberation Day and we've had 2 Liquidation Days. So the extent to which the market reacts is extremely responsive to what he's doing on tariffs. Now, if he gets the message, which is a big if, and at least stops putting more tariffs on, yeah, then I could see the market carving out a bottom, but from a much lower level. You noted the trillions of wealth that's evaporated in a mere couple. Those don't come back when the market bottoms. For those to come back, the market has to go back up. Second, if the scenario that he's created here with the uncertainty, the higher costs, and the slower growth does lead to a recession, and you just played somebody, one of the banks with a 60% recession probability, well, then the problems go much, much deeper. We actually got a pretty decent jobs report today, but that's backward looking. The markets are forward looking.
Right.
So we'll have to watch what happens in days to come.
Yeah. It's really striking, especially coming after a so-called economy referendum for the president that you worked for. And we reported before Election Day, there were people very concerned about prices and inflation. We did special reports on it. It was a real problem. But it was a problem of a certain size. And what we've now seen, before even hitting 100 days, is Trump dwarfing that problem multifold with the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Murdoch, conservatives, Republicans, everyone saying he made it so much worse. And there we are. Elections have consequences. We're going to be calling on you more, as I said, Jared, because of your great experience and wisdom, but in a bad way, on a tough story that I know is affecting people's lives. So thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ari.
Absolutely. We've got a lot more coming up tonight, including other big stories beyond the economy. Trump losing another immigration case about those controversial deportation flights, and startling revelations about a 9/11 truther calling the shots in the Trump White House. But coming up next, a story that mixes some of the market concern and the Democrats' response. President Obama stepping up. We'll tell you what he's saying.
Introducing Allison's Black Psoriasis. She thinks her flaky gray patches are all people see.
Otezla is the #1 prescribed pill to treat plaque psoriasis. Over here. Otezla can help you get clearer skin and reduce itching and flaking. Doctors have been prescribing Otezla for over a decade. Otezla is also approved to treat psoriatic arthritis. Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts.
With clear skin, girls' day out is a good day out. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla.
At this very moment, children at St. Jude are fighting to survive. With a gift right now, you can join the battle to save lives.
Without St. Jude, I don't know where we would be. They have given children with cancer, like my Winston, a chance.
She has neuroblastoma, and it has spread to her liver. I try to enjoy every minute with her because I do not know when would be my last moments with her.
When you support St. Jude and give $19 a month, you can help make cures possible for kids with cancer. St. Jude provides customized care for some of the world's sickest children. Please call, go online, or scan the QR code right now. Together, we can save more lives.
Just that feeling that was like so hard on your heart that the kid's not gonna live. Every day now, it's like a gift.
For just $19 a month, you can make a difference. Please become a St. Jude Partner in Hope right now.
Those that donate, it's more than a miracle for me. It's more than a blessing. They have done so much for me and my family.
Join with your credit or debit card for only $19 a month, and we'll send you this St. Jude t-shirt you can proudly wear to show your support.
All these children deserve to live, and I would love for it to be the day where no other family has to fear losing their child to cancer. You've given us hope.
Please don't wait until the last minute. Make your donation now to help St. Jude save lives.
Attention shoppers! Jardiance has a big story to tell. Ask your doctor if it should be part of your next act.
Visit GovX.com and join a community of patriots and pros. You've earned it. GovX, savings for those who serve.
From U.S. Navy SEAL Ray Mendoza and Civil War Director Alex Garland. When their mission goes wrong,
3 minutes out! Breathe in!
The only way out is together.
What did you do?
I saved her.
You swore.
Have it your way.
President Trump has caused all this economic pain with no end in sight, and we have something unusual. President Obama, who doesn't make it his practice to speak out on every controversy in this Trump era, is speaking out now. These were remarks made at a college, and the threats on the campaign trail, which Trump offered that look downright silly right now, another broken promise. But remember, Trump had said he would lower prices, and if he didn't win and Democrats won, then Harris would crash the markets. Instead, we know what we're living through this week. Here is the context.
You want to see a market crash? If we lost this election, I think the market would go down the tubes. We are a nation whose stock market's continued success is contingent on MAGA winning the next election. If Harris wins this election, the result will be a Kamala economic crash, a 1929-style depression. 1929. When I win the election, we will immediately begin a brand new Trump economic boom. It'll be a boom.
And the markets instead are crashing. Here is President Obama.
I think people tend to think, democracy, rule of law, independent judiciary, freedom of the press, that's all abstract stuff because it's not affecting the price of eggs. Well, you know what? It's about to affect the price of eggs. It is up to all of us to fix this. It's not going to be because somebody comes and saves you. The most important office in this democracy is the citizen, the ordinary person who says, no, that's not right.
Obama there summoning us all to do whatever part we can. He said that when it comes to this Trump policy and tariffs, it's not going to be good for America. And as for Trump and the complacent Republicans, it's unimaginable. The same parties that are silent now would have tolerated behavior like that from me or many of his predecessors. Vice President Harris also making some rare remarks.
We are seeing those who are capitulating to clearly unconstitutional threats, and these are the things that we are witnessing each day in these last few months in our country.
If you're not used to seeing either of those faces, that's because they have generally stepped back. But we do have a record here. And Kamala Harris, like any other politician, wasn't right about everything. She changed some of her positions. She had an unusually tough assignment coming in later than anyone else in the general election. But there was plenty of policy debate that's legitimate. Then there were things that were so stark, so obvious that she, like many of the Republicans I showed you earlier in tonight's broadcast, were just speaking about established facts in economic orthodoxy, things we know about policy, things we know about the failure of those tariffs that led to the U.S. depression, when Americans in a relatively affluent country were reduced to soup lines and homeless shelters for years, again, because of failed policy. This is why we know policy and elections matter. And so if you go run the clock back to not that long ago when Trump was threatening doing exactly this, and Wall Street and MAGA and others were minimizing it or basically saying he wouldn't really do it or it was just rhetoric, Kamala Harris spoke from that knowledge base and that history, warning about what exactly would happen this week, what these tariffs could do.
The sales tax of doing a 20% tariffs on all imports that he has described would be a 20% sales tax, in essence, on basic necessities for the average American worker, average American family, totaling almost $4,000 a year. That is no small matter.
It's not small at all. that tariff tax is what she warned in that MSNBC interview with our colleague Stephanie Ruhle in September. And fact check true. She was right about that. Indeed, if you take the $6 trillion loss and the rising prices, it could be even higher, which is why tonight we can report that what Kamala Harris has long said is what Ted Cruz and other Republicans are saying now. This is a tax. You need an off-ramp. Trump is wrong. We can show you the markets under Donald Trump's second term now, this many days in, compared to other presidents in their first 100 days in recent history, including President Obama, who we quoted tonight. Nobody is saying that every president controls every aspect of the economy or the markets, but what you see in the second term, even in contrast to Trump's own first term, in all fairness, is what happens when this completely unbridled individual with no more elections to run and a pure MAGA advisor base that won't tell him no on anything takes control of international economic policy and tanks the economy. We have a lot more coming up tonight, including that immigration loss I mentioned, so stay with us. President Trump has vowed to change the way immigration enforcement works in America, but at some points, he's changing it in ways that are downright erroneous. Take, for example, this new report that the Trump administration even admits they made a mistake and just deported the wrong person, a Maryland father who was legally here, on those now contested flights to El Salvador, which this judge has ruled were likely unlawful. The Trump administration is defending these flights, though, in court. The judge has not yet made a ruling, but did say there is a likelihood that the Trump administration has violated the order that was supposed to limit those flights and may have acted in bad faith. That's just one of several controversies as we look at this wholesale immigration change. And we have a special guest tonight to make sense of it all, the former acting Homeland Security Secretary under President Trump, Chad Wolf, who's also the executive vice president of the America First Policy Institute. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Immigration remains a big issue. What do you see as the main accomplishments or achievements of the administration here about 70 days in? And do you see anything that they could do better, or as they themselves said in that case, that they're doing erroneously?
Yeah, well, look, there's been a lot of action, obviously, taken by the president and his team early in this administration. And so you just have to look at, obviously, the number of border apprehensions have fallen probably to an all-time low. I think over a 94 or 95% improvement over the Biden administration, as well as removals, right, and deportations from the interior of the country. We saw during the Biden administration a lot of removals at the border, but not a lot of removals from the interior in the country, you know, places like New York City, and Chicago, Dallas,
on
and
that
elsewhere.
distinction,
So what those two areas, I think.
Let me ask you there, and then we'll get in deeper. But what do you see as a distinction there for folks who are, you know, you ran DHS, you had a lot of experience. What are you getting at? Are you saying that the interiors is more important, or that it represents some more assertive strategy?
Well, there's a lot of authority to remove individuals that you pick up right at the border, what we call border returns or pushbacks across that border. And so the Trump administration used that authority. The Biden administration used that authority. But when you really talk about removals, you talk about finding individuals, criminal illegal aliens and others that have been here for some period of time, and removing them, those on a final order removal, those are likely, you're going to find those in the interior of the country. And so that's really where you get, you know, the biggest bang for the buck. And we've seen more removals from the interior of the country over these last several months than we had previously.
Okay. Wanted to understand your point there. And let's stipulate that if you target and find people correctly for the right reason, or they have more danger or criminal record and they're inside the country, you could see why that would be an enforcement priority. Then you have what I mentioned, which is deporting the wrong people, while also potentially violating due process, according to the judge. We'll see what the appeals show. But this headline, the man sent to El Salvador, do you view that as wrong? And do you think other people who are legally here, whether they're legally here under immigration rules or American citizens themselves, now have to worry about being thrown on a plane without due process?
Well, I don't think so. And again, I would say that I agree with the Trump administration, which they have said, I believe in a court filing, that it was an error to remove this individual. But I think it's important really to dive into this individual's background. He has a final order of removal. He also has a withholding of removal just specifically to El Salvador. So the error obviously is removing him back to a country that a judge says you can't remove him to. But this individual doesn't have legal permanent status here in the United States.
Finish,
he has a final order of removal.
I'll let you finish, but
and the government
because
says that he has ties to MS-13.
But that's because of a judge, whether the government likes it or not, finding there could be danger to him, and the American system doesn't just send people back violating against a court order to a place where they might be hurt, right?
Sure, and that same judge back in 2019 also said that he had ties to MS-13, but we also hear a variety of folks saying, well, he doesn't have ties to MS-13. So either you're going to rely on a judge's opinion for all things or you're not. And in this case, again, I would agree with you. It's an error to send him back to that country that he has a withholding of removal to. But again, he has a final order of removal. He has no legal right to remain in the United States under that final order. He just simply should not have been processed back to El Salvador.
Understand the distinction you're making, and then how do you assure others if there are these kind of errors? And as you know, flights took off without what was the apparent due process. What's to stop the government from doing that to other people? And they say, oh, we didn't know it was an American.
Well, again, I don't know that I agree with you about the lack of due process. But again, that's going to be up to the government to say, here are the assurances that we put in place. My guess, since it is being litigated in court, they're going to have to lay that out to that judge and to others to say, here's the process that we go through. And like any process, there are going to be errors from time to time. I'm not saying that that's an excuse or anything, but that's the reality of it. But the question for the government is, how do they minimize those? And then what's the recourse if an error is identified?
Sure. Although I think the whole point of having the system work with the process up front is that error is discovered before someone is in a foreign prison or whatnot. I know your time is... Go ahead if you want to respond.
But again, the individuals that we're talking about here are designated terror groups, MS-13, TDA, and others. These are terrorist groups designated by the president, which gives, and again, this is being litigated, but again, gives him wide latitude and authority to remove these individuals out of the country. And I think that's the basis of, obviously, the court case and other things. So, yes, I do agree with you. We need to make sure that we are removing the right people to the right place, and that's incumbent on the government to do that. But the latitude and the discretion that the president has is I would say, is wide in this case.
All right, and I'm sure we could go in even more depth. I want to get you on other things with your limited time. There was the very controversial treatment of this Tufts University student, Rumeysa Öztürk, Turkish national. The video, I think, has been seen. I'm sure you're familiar with it. You have these federal agents who, in this case, have their identities concealed and are trying to remove her. When you look at that level of tactic, and then you also have a pattern, or perhaps an anecdotal pattern, if I want to be as charitable as possible, where there are allegations that some people might be getting harsher treatment because of their speech, because of the positions they take, which anyone could disagree with, and yet isn't that the whole point of America, including people who are visiting? And so the allegations, and I've got the headlines up here, are that the administration may be going beyond its lawful power, which is quite broad in the immigration area, as I've told viewers, to potentially target people for the stances they take. So my question to you on this rather controversial case is twofold. One, with your expertise, do you view those measures as valid, what we saw in her treatment? And two, would it concern you if there was a pattern of targeting people because of what they said, of what they believe?
Well, let me take maybe the first question first, which is about the tactics. You showed the video of law enforcement coming up.
And we can put the video up.
I've seen just a small portion of that video. And look, I've heard this when I was at the Department of Homeland Security about the tactics law enforcement uses. They use certain tactics to not only keep the officer safe, but to keep the suspect safe as well. So if they rolled in there with blaring sirens and other things, there are other issues at play here. So when you're doing some undercover work and you want to pick someone up and you try to do that in a safe setting, there are certain tactics they use. From what I can tell, in the very limited portion that I've seen from that video, That's what it looks like that they're doing. Now, as far as students being removed here, I think it's important to remember, it's important for your viewers to remember, whether you're here on a student visa or an LPR, these are benefits provided to you by the United States government. You don't have a right to be here. There's no right given to you. And so as you come in and you are a student here on a student visa, there are certain requirements that you have to fit and to adhere to. And if, as the government contends in some of these cases, you either have ties to or that you are promoting a terrorist organization such as Hamas, then the government is saying that's a bridge too far. You don't get to stay here and continue to do that. And
but
so they are removing
and I know we're running over on time,
that
but
way.
And again, as we say in the business, fact check true if there are actual operational ties to one of those groups. But I just want to narrow in before I lose you. The question was, if this is found to be targeting over views, over what I called speech, separate from operational link to those groups, would that concern you as a DHS veteran?
Well, I don't think, again, you need to make sure that you're removing individuals based on facts and reality, and the government is saying that they have evidence, again, maybe not in every case, and again, there's a lot of stuff I would say to viewers is what's being reported on is just the tip of the iceberg, usually with these cases, and what the government knows about these individuals and the research and the investigative work that they've done. And so it's incumbent on the government at some point, whether it's in a court or wherever it might be, to say, here's why we're removing you, and we are removing you. So, again, I don't accept the premise that they're removing people just based on speech. It's for a variety of circumstances that they're uncovering during their investigations.
Well, these are big issues, as you know, including the way the government powers are being used. You've been in this position as acting Homeland Security Chief, Chad Wolf, so we hope to benefit from talking to everyone, and I appreciate you joining us.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Our thanks again to DHS veteran Chad Wolf. I want to mention this headline, that interview airing for the first time just now. We actually sat down and taped the conversation late yesterday. It didn't air on the program last night amidst all that breaking news on tariffs and markets plunging. And this update I want to share on one of those immigration topics is a federal judge ruled late today the administration actually must return that man we mentioned who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The administration must bring him back to the U.S. Trump officials say they intend to appeal that new loss, just as the DOJ under Trump is challenging other lower court rulings and setbacks about their claims to wartime powers and this wider set of controversial deportations. As I've told you, we will continue to report all of this without fear or favor and invite on people in and out of power who've held these jobs so you can hear everything and make up your own mind. We are going to fit in a break, but next, a 9/11 truther calling the shots in Trump's National Security Council. Thanks for spending time with us. I wish you a good weekend. And if you want, on Saturday tomorrow, you can always catch The Beat Weekend. We have some very special stuff planned. That's Saturdays, 4 p.m. Eastern. Put it in your DVR or calendar, and depending on your schedule, maybe you want that catch-up on a Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern. That does it for us. Elisa Menendez takes over next.
Good evening, I'm Alicia Menendez, and we begin tonight with the continued fallout from President Trump's Liberation Day global trade war. For a second day, financial markets were in free fall. Today, the Dow Jones dropped just over 2,200 points, making it the worst day for the market since the start of the pandemic. It takes the title away from yesterday's market performance, which saw more than $3 trillion, yes, with a T, dollars in losses. Couldn't help that this morning China responded to Trump's new trade attacks by announcing it will impose a 34% retaliatory tariff on all U.S. goods. Economists at J.P. Morgan now raising the odds of a recession to 60%. That is a significant jump from just before the tariff rollout. And we heard today from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, who acknowledged that the damage from the trade war will be worse than expected.
While uncertainty remains elevated, it is now becoming clear that tariff increases will be significantly larger than expected. And the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. The size and duration of these effects remains uncertain. While tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation, it's also possible that the effects could be more persistent.
And while all of this is playing out on a global scale, raising concern and confusion of what is to come, Trump spent the day relaxing at his golf resort in Florida. He's about to speak at a $1 million a person candlelight dinner at Mar-a-Lago for a super PAC that supports him. Joining me now, Senator Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont. Senator, what are you hearing from folks in your state about what this is going to mean for them?
This is hammering them badly. I mean, the inflation that Jerome Powell talked about is real. We're going to pay higher electricity prices, higher home heating fuel prices, higher gasoline prices. It's hitting our farmers hard. They import their grain from Canada. Our manufacturers are going to be paying higher prices. And then with the retaliatory tariffs, we're going to have some manufacturers paying tariffs going out, or they'll be charged, and then paying tariffs when the finished product comes back. And what's happening in Vermont is happening, of course, all around the country. It's really bad.
It is really bad, made worse by the fact that you have a White House and a president who don't even seem to be on the same page about their messaging. Take a listen.
The president made it clear yesterday this is not a negotiation. This is a national emergency.
Let me make this very clear. This is not a negotiation. This is not that. This is a national emergency.
Are you open to deals with these countries if they're calling you?
Well, it depends. If somebody said that we're going to give you something that's so phenomenal, as long as they're giving us something that's good. The tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Always have.
How are other countries, how are businesses in this country supposed to decide what to do when they aren't even told the rules of the game?
Well, they obviously can't. They just are paralyzed. And, you know, what Trump can do, and he's been doing it here, is strong arm businesses or law firms and subject them to his will. What he's finding out with these tariffs is that other countries won't be bullied. And in fact, the domestic politics in any country, Canada or European Union, requires those folks to stand up for the people they represent against the Trump bully that is perceived who he is in those countries. So he's gone a bridge too far. And by the way, I'm seeing cracks in this. You know, a lot of his Republican supporters here in Congress put their faith in Trump. It'll work out. Well, they're seeing that it's catastrophic. Those things that are happening to folks in Vermont are happening to folks in South Carolina or North Carolina. And there is legislation now to restrict that tariff authority. And we have several co-sponsors, and it's led by Chuck Grassley. So I think there's cracks in the armor here. People are seeing what is really happening and not listening to essentially the braggadocio of a president who doesn't have a clue as to what an economic rationale is for this reckless policy.
Let's talk about that Grassley-Cantwell legislation, right? If you get enough votes in the Senate, do you believe there's any shot of it passing through the House, or is it DOA in the House? And if it is DOA in the House, what recourse then does the upper chamber have left?
With the current House, I think it is DOA, but that doesn't mean that it isn't really important, because if we get Senate Republicans to stand up for common sense and say what we all see, and that is this tariff policy of the president is reckless and harmful, that is going to be something that voters in these districts start to see. And when they start talking to their representatives and demand that we stop the pain, stop the punishment of these tariffs that lead to higher prices, that may be something that ultimately affects Trump. But he's a very willful person. That's what's so dangerous about him. He doesn't have any credible economic backing on how this makes sense. But he's kind of a bully, and he's pushing it, and all to the harm of everyday Americans.
Kind of a bully is perhaps the kindest way one could put that. Vermont Senator Peter Welch. Senator, thank you so much for starting us off. Let's bring in our colleague Stephanie Ruhle, NBC News senior business analyst and host of the 11th Hour. All right, Stephanie, no one explains this stuff better than you. Talk to me first about how China is retaliating.
Okay, no surprise. You know, the idea was everyone else was going to fold. China is retaliating because this is a trade war. And in a trade war, no one wins. And there's something specifically I want to point out about the impact, because we just keep saying this is going to cost individuals so much more money. Think about what this is doing for business, big and small. Over and over, we keep hearing the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, say, we're going to be manufacturing here. The robots are going to do it. What company have you heard in the last 48 hours say we've just brought in a whole bunch of robots and they're going to make the sneakers now? What CEO has said we're going to build a factory? And let's be clear, if one were going to build a factory, it would be a multi-billion-dollar commitment. It would take 3 to 5 years to do that. So what's going to happen over the next 5 years? Because if you walk into a shopping mall tomorrow, Alicia, take a look at any of those stores. Do they sell clothes? Do they sell sportswear? Do they sell sneakers? If they do, we don't manufacture those things in the United States. That doesn't exist. I remember Adidas tried to do manufacturing here for 15 years, huge investments. It didn't really work. If you and I wanted to take a walk in the garment district right now in New York City, it'd be a short walk. We don't have one anymore. So when you take a look at so many of these stocks that are crumbling, these are real businesses and real people who have no means to get those clothes now to the United States without paying huge tariffs. And if they do, you and I are going to be paying 25 or 50% more when we're buying our sons sneakers and clothes in the weeks to come. So when we hear from this administration, like a Howard Lutnick, who's saying, oh, the robots are going to do it, what robots? The only CEOs I know about are the ones I've been talking to for the last 72 hours, from big companies, small companies, Wall Street investors. And you know what they're doing? Calling this White House and saying, please stop doing this. It is economic suicide for our consumers, for our voters, and for our businesses.
For part of that economic suicide, you had employers adding 228,000 jobs last month. You saw that jobs report. Given the tariffs, does that number end up being the high water mark?
Here's the thing about that number. That number shows us that Joe Biden handed President Trump a strong economy. And when you started this show and you said, we haven't seen a day like this since the start of the pandemic, imagine that. We never had a pandemic, a health event like that in your and my lifetime. That's what caused the market to tumble, because the economy was getting shut down. And now this is completely self-inflicted. And you know what's happened in the last 24 hours? No surprise. Palace intrigue in the White House, right? In the last 24 hours, I spoke to people inside the administration who had told me they thought that Secretary Bessent was going to look to leave and move to the Fed. I then heard from someone senior in the administration today saying, no, that's not the case. Secretary Bessent is committed to being here. He's focused on debt and deficit. And why is this palace intrigue happening? Because when the pressure cooker heats up, the knives are out for one another. But in this case, there can't be a fall guy. This isn't a Howard Lutnick's going to be out or Bessent's going to be out, because when it comes to tariffs, they all fall in the lap of Donald John Trump, who has been going on and on about tariffs since the 1980s. And so Howard Lutnick is on TV spinning and spinning every day. I mean, saying, we can't import our rice to the Far East. That's going to change. No, it's not. Why on earth would a country in Asia import rice from us? That's where the rice paddies are. So they're spinning all of this while markets are crashing and individuals are worried about losing their jobs if they work at a number of any kind of companies here, because this is devastating.
Well, and then you referenced the Fed. You've got Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell just sounding the alarm on what these tariffs are going to mean for inflation. And I'm not sure if you saw this, but you had Trump preemptively pinning responsibility on Powell. This is from Truth Social. This would be a perfect time for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He is always late, but he could now change his image. And quickly, Mr. Trump wrote, cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics. Worth noting, this is totally apolitical institution, the Federal Reserve, and yet you have Trump trying to politicize it.
Brother, please. This is ridiculous. Donald Trump trying to politicize this as though Jay Powell impacting interest rates and this whole hustle. He's going to cut rates and that's going to solve everything. First of all, Jay Powell is apolitical. The fact that we even had a soft landing after the pandemic was extraordinary. And I wouldn't say to you we didn't have inflation. We had crippling inflation. It was so difficult. The government has spent a huge amount of money. We have to dig our way out of this. But Jay Powell is not going to be influenced by the president yelling at him, browbeating him on a social media platform. It makes absolutely no sense. And the problems that we're having, you can't blame them on the Fed. You cannot blame them on Jay Powell. You have to blame them on the president. And while I understand the sentiment, Alicia, It does stink that manufacturing has been hollowed out in the United States. We have had some unfair trade practices that were put in place over the 90s, but that's not the case necessarily anymore. And in Trump's first administration, they renegotiated NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, and now he's torn it up. Some of our closest trading allies, we said to all these manufacturers, don't manufacture in China. They're our adversary. Go to Vietnam. And now what are we doing? Slapping on an almost 50% tariff to Vietnam. So the thing that we're losing, Jay Powell has credibility. The United States, the president, the White House is losing credibility. We're not going to be treated like a trusted partner because we're not acting like one. And I'm not sure why we would expect that Donald Trump would, because when you look at him historically, he's a super talented politician, but when it comes to business, he was never a stand-up guy. He went bankrupt, and these aren't my words. I have spoken to so many people in the business community. This is a man who went bankrupt 6 times, who was known in the business world for not standing up to contracts that he agreed to pay. And now here he is, leader of the most important, trusted nation in the world, and the way he's behaving to our allies around the world, we're not trusted.
Stephanie, just real quick, let's just game something out. Let's say he wakes up on Monday and he realizes this whole thing has been a mess and he changes his mind. Any way he spins it as a win, says, I got this concession, I got that concession, and just pretends as though the manufacturing piece of this never happened.
So I don't have any audio, but I think that you were talking about Trump bringing manufacturing back. And the thing about that, Alicia, is we would all like that idea. We would like to see people that worked in the manufacturing belt get those jobs back. There's just no concrete plan to do that. And the other thing to remember, we have a labor shortage in this country. What we don't have is the ability to have super, super cheap labor like it exists abroad, and we're not going to be bringing that back here. And while we have the Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent, say, cheap goods coming quickly isn't part of the American dream, it's not the American dream, but it's the American way. And we're not going to suddenly bring manufacturing back here and the American people are going to be in a position to pay a lot more for their everyday items. It's not who we are. This idea that we're making a shift to go from short-termism to long-termism, we're not. It's not who we are, and it's not going to work.
Stephanie Ruhle, business analyst, host of the 11th Hour, and lip reader, it turns out. Thank you so much for taking the time. We will see you tonight on the 11th Hour. And coming up, a federal judge has ruled that the Trump administration must return the man mistakenly deported to El Salvador by Monday night. More on this major legal development after a quick break. Lashini's from the U.S. District Court in Greenbelt, Maryland, ruled that the government must return Garcia by Monday. Garcia, a protected legal resident who has been living in Maryland since 2011 and is originally from El Salvador, was sent back to that country in March over what the Trump administration called an administrative error in court filings on Monday. Joining me now is Skye Perryman, president and CEO of Democracy Forward. Skye, I think anyone who was upset about this case is more upset after today's hearing, given what came to light. ICE officials blamed an administrative error and oversight for Kilmar Abrego Garcia's deportation, but they didn't take action to rectify that mistake. What kind of government makes a mistake that rips a parent from their child and then makes no effort to correct it?
This may be Donald Trump's America or Kristi Noem's America, but it's not what the American people stand for. And we saw that in the court today in the ruling, deep concern that the government had not even followed the advice of the government's own counsel. You saw reporting about the government's own counsel saying that he had recommended to his client that they return Mr. Garcia. And of course, they did not. This is callous, it is unlawful, and it is also un-American.
Let's stay right on that point. You went to exactly what I picked up, which is that you have DOJ's own attorney being critical of the federal government for its lack of cooperation, for the lack of willingness to produce evidence. The judge said there is no warrant for his arrest, meaning Abrego Garcia. There is no statement of probable cause. What is the actual document that got this process started? And the DOJ attorney then responds, I don't have that order. It's not in the record. How can you remove people from this country without so much as a paper trail? And if you are choosing to do that, what does it say about the intent of your operation?
Look, I mean, this is a sham operation. We know that. We know that not just in this case, but in other cases as well. And you're seeing it right out. The government does not even want to follow the advice of its own lawyers. It has been uninterested in actually getting the facts, actually protecting the American people, and instead just wants made for TV moments. And then for us to just say, oops, when they make a mistake, so to speak. This was not a mistake. It has been an intentional policy of this administration to remove people from the country with no process whatsoever. And that is why we are fighting in court. And of course, that's why Mr. Garcia's attorney has been pressing in this case.
Well, let's just take it a step further, which is they remove folks without due process. And then once the mistake was recognized, if I understand it correctly, the government basically has the audacity to argue that they can't do anything about it because Garcia is now in El Salvador's jurisdiction. It almost made me wonder if their play the entire time was not just to wrongfully remove people, but then to remove them from our system of justice.
Well, of course, that's what their play is. And I don't think it's going to work in this case. And I don't think it's going to work in other cases because you have lawyers and judges doing their job to protect the American people when this administration will not. But it is very striking that here you have an attorney from the Department of Justice. I just want to make sure that folks at home understand what happened today, having to say to a court, my client didn't follow my recommendation. And I don't have answers that I am supposed to have showing up into court because my client hasn't provided those. That is not how the United States government functions. That's not how any of us get to function if we have to go into court. And I think you really see this lawlessness and callous behavior on display.
Okay, so you have this big immigration hearing. Also in legal headlines say you had Harmeet Dillon, the far-right conservative lawyer nominated by Donald Trump to lead the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, confirmed by the Senate, a 52-45 vote. You had Senator Murkowski, the lone Republican, to vote against her. Mark Elias, the founder of Democracy Docket, posting the news about Dillon's confirmation and calling it the worst news of the week, which is a high bar to clear right now. Sky Perryman, do you agree that this is among the worst news of the week?
I do, and I agree with the voting rights advocates that have said this is really like the fox guarding the hen house. Although we're not on a farm, we're in American society. It is deeply disturbing. You have over 75 civil rights organizations coming out against this nomination. This is an individual that not only does not, fails to support the civil rights of people, but has been responsible for perpetuating conspiracy theories about the right to vote and about election integrity. And I think when you look at this nomination and this confirmation, at the same time that you look at things that the president and his administration are doing to make it harder for people to vote, we really do have a crisis on our hands.
Well, talk to me about that crisis in a distinct way, which is when you look forward to 2026. When you look forward to 2028, the fact that this is the person who would now be in charge of the division that becomes the federal government's chief enforcer of voting rights, spearheads the U.S. government efforts to crack down on racist violence and intimidation. And now it is someone who would seem has no interest. To the contrary, has a record of moving in the other direction. What does that tell you about what we can expect in 2026 and 2028?
I think it tells you that you certainly can't expect this administration to try to protect the American people or to protect our ability and our freedom to govern ourselves and to vote. But what you should also know, and what you see in court every single day, is that there are lawyers and communities and clients out there that are going to ensure that our rights are protected by bringing litigation to challenge this administration's attempt to undermine people's ability to vote and to undermine our democracy as a whole. So I can promise you're going to see that. The problem is we should be also seeing that from the Department of Justice, which is going to be completely derelict in its duty to protect the American people.
Sky Perryman, as always, thank you for such a clear-eyed view.
Thanks.
Up next, the concerning firings of the National Security Agency chief and deputy director. with far-right conspiracist Laura Loomer taking credit for their removals after she met with President Trump in the Oval Office earlier this week. All that is next. President Trump continues to prioritize loyalty to him over experience when it comes to America's national security. On Thursday, the director of the National Security Agency, General Timothy Hawk, and Deputy Director Wendy Noble were both dismissed. No immediate reason was given, but it's part of a purge of officials at the National Security Council. The president also dismissed several other officials after a meeting with far-right activist Laura Loomer. Both Hawk and Noble, they are career officials, decades of experience in national security. General Hawk has spent more than 30 years in the Air Force, primarily in intelligence and cyber positions. Wendy Noble joined the NSA in 1987 and has worked her way up through the agency. Joining me now, Mark Palameropoulos, MSNBC national security and intelligence analyst. All right, Mark, this is very alarming on its face. Talk me through what would have been in General Hawk's purview. What was it that he was responsible for?
So General Hawk was dual-hatted, is kind of the word we say. He was the head of the National Security Agency, which is the incredibly powerful intelligence entity of the United States government that's responsible for intercepting our adversaries' communications. But he also was the head of Cyber Command, which is responsible for both defensive and offensive measures to protect the United States against our adversaries, such as Iran, China, and Russia. And this is an extraordinary move. You have a far-right activist who's almost acting like the national security advisor, marching into the Oval Office, trying to get the national security advisor, Mike Waltz, fired, ending up getting several of his deputies fired, and then General Hawk as well. I mean, this is something that really has sent a chill through the national security establishment. It's a terrible message for the intelligence community and for DOD officials. Look, there's huge issues going on now with the economy, and I understand that. But this is a major story, which I think has profound effects for American national security.
I think it is telling that you have pushback from Republicans in Congress, including Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon. He wrote on X just today, General Tim Hawk is an outstanding leader and was doing a superb job at Cyber Command and National Security Agency. He was fired with no public explanation. This action sets back our cyber and signals intelligence operations. At a time, as you said, unprecedented cyber threats, if you are an American adversary, if you are more specifically Russia, how are you then trying to maximize and exploit this change in leadership?
Well, right, Alicia, because, in fact, General Hawk was responsible for a lot of the U.S. countermeasures against Russia, in fact, pushing back against Russian interference in U.S. elections. And so the Russians are probably, passing out long bottles of vodka at Russian intelligence headquarters now because they know that there's dysfunction in the U.S. national security establishment. NSA has now been neutered a bit. Other people, capable people, will take over, but it certainly casts a pall over the U.S. intelligence community. And look, there's a time where we have issues with Russia, Ukraine. The U.S. is at war right now with the Houthis in Yemen, and we have a U.S. military buildup for a possible conflict with Iran. And so you have this dysfunctional national security team. This is really less than ideal.
Well, and it's the national security team. It's an entire culture of fear, reportedly, inside of DOD, where people are concerned, people who are in the officer ranks, that if they have any behavior that is read as not a proper show of loyalty to Donald Trump, that they could be the next on the chopping block. And just from an expertise perspective, I mean, these are not easy people to replace, right? General Hawk is not an easy person to replace. How do you even begin that process? And then what holes are left between this culture of fear and this absence of expertise?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, look, first of all, certainly with General Hawk, who was incredibly well respected in the cyber community, someone who, he will be replaced, but it will be difficult. But also at the National Security Council level, too. You have senior directors now who are gone. And so, what you need in the national security world is people who are not yes men and women, who will push back if there's an illegal order or if there's something that we shouldn't be doing. But right now, it seems the only trait that is required is loyalty. And Alicia, let me say one other thing. Mike Waltz should have offered his resignation based on this. His staff was being fired. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, same thing. To see the head of Cyber Command being fired like this, Yet neither of them did so because, again, what they're valuing more than anything else, what Trump is valuing, is loyalty over competence. And I think ultimately Americans are certainly less safe because of this.
As demonstrated by Signalgate. There's also, and I didn't want to start here because at the end of the day, all of these are Donald Trump's decisions, but I think part of what we are questioning here is the judgment of it all. Let's talk about where Laura Loomer comes into this story. The New York Times reporting today that a U.S. official briefed on the matter said Loomer, a far-right activist, outside advisor to President Trump, called for General Hawk's removal during her Oval Office meeting on Thursday. Trump ordered Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to fire General Hawk, the official said. Loomer claimed credit for the firing on X. She claimed that General Hawk and Wendy Noble were, quote, disloyal to the president on Thursday. The president was asked by reporters about Loomer's influence, and you need to hear it from him himself. Take a listen.
So Laura Loomer is a very good patriot. She is a very strong person. And I saw her yesterday for a little while.
What did she recommend?
She recommended certain people for jobs.
Adding to the administration, not
adding.
Who did she recommend? Firing?
Well, she'll recommend that too. But yesterday she recommended some people for jobs.
Did she have anything to do with the NSC aides who were ousted?
No.
Okay, so they're contradicting one another. He confirmed that he does take advice from someone who is a 9/11 conspiracy theorist who calls herself a proud Islamophobe. Just the fact that she has his ear, and then he is executing based on the advice that she is given. What does that mean for America's national security?
It's frightening. You had a 9/11 truther. First of all, how did she gain access to the Oval Office? She gets in there and then she gives recommendations, and President Trump takes them. And again, there's not enough people with authority around President Trump to say, first of all, don't let her in. But number two is you can't listen to her. Again, you can't have this 9/11 truther, this right-wing loon, dictating U.S. decision making in terms of personnel. And the other part too is, what was perhaps alarming is who are they going to replace some of these officials with?
Yes, let's go. Let's talk about that. I mean, right now they're temporarily being replaced by career officials, but as you know from watching every other organization that they have cleared out, their goal is to replace these folks with loyalists. You have someone who is a Donald Trump loyalist in this job. What is your greatest fear?
Well, you put a kind of a political hack into the job of the National Security Agency chief, again, dual-hatted as the head of Cyber Command. Ordinarily, Alicia, this is a 4-star general with decades of experience. But you put a political partisan there, it does become a bit alarming because, again, the National Security Agency is certainly responsible for eavesdropping on our adversaries. But it's a very powerful tool, and I think a lot of people will be concerned that this could be also used for domestic reasons. And again, what is amazing is that Donald Trump promised to have this kind of depoliticization of the national security apparatus. He is doing absolutely the opposite. So I think a lot of eyes are going to be on who is going to go into some of these positions. Again, the National Security Agency chief, but also who comes into the senior director jobs at the National Security Council. Again, usually reserved for very experienced professionals. It might not be the case this time.
Mark Polymeropoulos. Thank you, Mark, so much. Coming up, Democrats stepped up their resistance game this week with Senator Cory Booker's record-breaking Senate floor speech and nationwide rallies planned for this weekend. Stay with us. After months of struggling to find their footing, this week the anti-Trump resistance really stepped up to the plate. From Senator Cory Booker delivering a record-breaking speech on the Senate floor, taking on Trump's agenda, to the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, where the Liberal candidate handily beat the candidate backed by Trump and Elon Musk. That momentum is going to continue into the weekend. Tomorrow, hundreds of thousands of Americans are expected to take to the streets across all 50 states to rally against the administration's actions in what may be the largest single-day protest since President Trump re-entered office. Joining me now, two great columnists, Michelle Goldberg and Eugene Robinson. Both are MSNBC political analysts. Michelle, is your sense that something shifted this week?
I think something has been shifting as the Democratic Party sort of follows its base, right? You've had this growing absolute fury. It's a combination, I think, of fury and terror among huge numbers of Democratic voters and maybe some people who are not even Democratic partisans, but just didn't know that they were either voting to lose their jobs, to tank the stock market, to see the complete disassembly of American leadership in the world, to end, kind of any semblance of a public health. I mean, you could go on and on and on, right? There was just, I don't think that a lot of people, I think people who hate Trump anticipated this, but a lot of people who were maybe indifferent to politics didn't see how much this was going to affect their own lives. And so there's been this building sense among many, many people that this is a crisis and that no one is leading them. And it was this kind of weird political vacuum where you saw the Democratic Party really stumbling, and just as a matter of kind of political entrepreneurship, it made no sense. That's nobody except for, AOC, I think, was picking up that mantle, Senator Chris Murphy, a couple of other people. But the Democratic Party, I think, has finally realized that if they don't want their own Tea Party movement to overthrow a bunch of incumbents, they need to lead.
Right. And Eugene, I think up until this week, part of what was difficult, it was all vibes. It was hard to measure. And the fact that you have this race in Wisconsin where there is a decisive victory on the part of the Liberal candidate, the fact that you had Democrats closing margins in 2 ruby red Florida districts, it tells you that it is actually showing up in the electorate when they are given the opportunity to express their discontent.
That's absolutely right. I mean, there were some things you could count. You saw the huge crowds that AOC and Senator Bernie Sanders were drawing, with just tens of thousands of people coming out to hear, 2 politicians who are not in power talk about what's going on and how it had to be corrected and what was being lost in the chaos of the Trump and the new Trump administration. And so you saw that this was bubbling up, not in Washington, but out in the country, across the country. And you saw it concretely expressed this week with those election results that demonstrate, I think, to Washington what Democrats in other parts of the country had been feeling, had been sensing, that there is a resistance and that the resistance is angry and the resistance is ready to be led.
You have former President Barack Obama speaking yesterday at Hamilton College in New York. Let's take a listen to what he said.
It has been easy during most of our lifetimes to say you are progressive, or say you are for social justice, or say you're for free speech, and not have to pay a price for it. And now we're at one of those moments where, it's not enough just to say you're for something. You may actually have to do something and possibly sacrifice a little bit.
What do you think about that, Michelle?
I'm glad to hear him speaking out, and I hope that kind of every partner at a law firm that has made these utterly corrupt, shameful capitulations understands that he was subtweeting them, or at least that's how I heard it. These, university presidents, again, who have just rolled over in the hopes that he won't cut their funding instead of joining together in a united front. I also think, I guess better late than never, right? I would have liked to see Obama out there much more strongly before now. I understand that there's a certain
deference.
There's a certain deference, but we are in such a crisis. We are in such an emergency situation that just out of patriotism, I think you kind of set that deference aside and help people. People need to know that there are people, honestly, there's no one in charge right now who has their best interest at heart. But people at least need to know that there are figures of authority and, who can speak to the urgency of this moment.
Right, and the urgency of this moment, it matters because people people feel discouraged, Eugene, right? And that is something that the former president was tapping into. He said, don't get discouraged. He said, I know it's a little crazy right now, but we're going to be okay. I'm sure you heard former Vice President Harris delivering remarks yesterday. She said much the same thing. Fear has a way of being contagious, but courage is also contagious. To Michelle's point, people need to know that they are not alone, especially since authoritarianism relies on the populace indeed feeling discouraged.
Absolutely. And so to just sort of not speak up for former President Obama or for former Vice President Harris would be a norm, right? Would be adhering to a norm. But this is no time to adhere to norms of politeness when every single norm and many laws are being broken by this outlaw administration that's just running roughshod over the other two branches of government, that's defying court orders, that's destroying the government, including parts of the government that everyone should want to retain. And it's amazing. And Michelle is absolutely right. Those law firm partners, those university presidents need to realize that this is not the time to cave in to the pressure, and they will pay a price. But in the long run, you know, if you cave in, what will Donald Trump do? He will demand more. He will continue to press, and that's what bullies do, and they have to be stood up to.
Eugene, let's talk about your least favorite topic to talk about, and that is yourself. You had some news this week. You announced you're going to be leaving the Washington Post, where you've been a columnist for decades. Talk to me about that decision in the context of everything you just laid out.
Well, you know, my decision is a personal decision, and it's you know, I've been at the Washington Post for 45 years. What spurred my thinking was the decree from the Post's owner, Jeff Bezos, that the opinion section where I work will be refocused. That there was nothing that said that what I write would necessarily be affected, and indeed I have not had anyone tell me what to write, but it was a repositioning of our and refocusing of our opinions section that I disagreed with, and I felt strongly enough to think about my next chapter, and you know, this is a lot of thinking I was going to have to undertake in you know, the next year or so, anyhow, next couple of years, but the time was now.
Eugene Robinson, you are immortal, so I don't like that timeline. I don't buy any of it. You're going to have to make this decision in the next few years.
I'm not going anywhere. Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm certainly not shutting up.
That is.
But I did feel that it was time for me to make this decision.
That is music to my ears. I only have about 20 seconds left. Michelle, tomorrow you're going to cover these protests. What are you looking for?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think that they're going to be really big, and I think that'll be one of the indicators is just how big they are. Because although there's been a lot of town halls, a lot of events, there hasn't been one day where you could really gauge the size and intensity of the resistance. I think tomorrow will be that.
Michelle Goldberg, Eugene Robinson, thank you both so much for being with us. Well, Trump is facing criticism for skipping the dignified transfer of 4 U.S. soldiers who died during a training exercise and heading to Florida to attend a golf reception. The details after this break. This was the scene in Vilnius, Lithuania, as that country's president, First Lady, and hundreds of other dignitaries and citizens paid homage to 4 American soldiers: Sergeant Jose Dueñas Jr., Sergeant Edwin Franco, Private First Class Dante Titano, and Staff Sergeant Troy Knutson Collins. All tragically died during a training exercise accident while stationed in Lithuania. Our own president was not present to receive their remains in a ceremony known as the dignified transfer when they arrived at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth filled in for America's commander-in-chief, who chose instead to travel to Miami for a Saudi-funded live golf tournament at his own course. He also attended a dinner reception there. His staff tweeted this image late Thursday afternoon, celebrating that it was almost Friday with a festive font, as those fallen American heroes were being returned to American soil. During his first administration, the Huffington Post reported that Trump attended just 4 dignified transfers, avoiding the ceremony entirely for almost 2 years after getting berated by the father of a slain Navy SEAL. That's all for this hour. I'm Alicia Menendez. You can see me, Simone Sanders Townsend, and Michael Steele on the weekend tomorrow morning. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries is going to join our conversation. And on Sunday, we'll talk to Michigan Senate candidate Mallory McMorrow. That and more on the weekend, 8 a.m. Eastern, right here on MSNBC. And we are asking for your vote. MSNBC on TikTok is nominated for a Webby Award in the News and Politics Social category. You can visit msnbc.com/Webby to cast your ballot. All In with Chris Hayes starts right now.